Welcome, I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel. This is the February 2022 astrology forecast. First off, thank you so much to my patrons. If you would like to get access to these forecasts early, usually about a week or so earlier than everyone else, please join patreon.com/Nina Griffin. You can also access other exclusive content that's never made available to the public concerning astrology and magic there as well. And at the highest tier, you can also get my monthly newsletter or document detailing all of the most auspicious magical elections for making talismans and other magical rituals. All right, let's get started. So February 2022 is relatively planetarily uneventful. I think that primarily this month is about recovering from the intense aspects that we saw in December and January. As I've said before, January was going to be the Capricorn and Aquarius show, if you will, because so many of the planets, the visible planets, were in one of these Saturn-ruled signs. Now, because of that, January was always going to be a month of restraint, of limitation, but also, if we use it wisely, a month that would allow us to lay some foundations for the future. Now, remember that the new moon and full moon influence is always 2 weeks after the actual lunation. And we had a new moon January 31st, which is actually the Lunar New Year as well. And this particular new moon was ruled by and conjoined by Saturn in Aquarius. So this gives the first 2 weeks of February a restrained and kind of a limited, subdued tone. Now, in terms of weather, because lunations are particularly useful for forecasting the weather in the next 2 weeks, this new moon would bring very cold temperatures. In weather astrology, or astrometeorology, if you will, it is said that Aquarius is the coldest sign, and Saturn, of course, is the coldest planet. So we could assume there's going to be a lot of cold as well as a lot of snow over the first 2 weeks of February in many locations, of course, primarily in the northern hemisphere. So let's start with week 1 of February. February 3rd, Mercury will finally go direct at 24 degrees Capricorn. Now, this is a relatively comfortable position for Mercury because he was already in Capricorn in December of 2021, then he went into Aquarius, and then he retrograded back into Capricorn January 25th. So he's been in Capricorn for quite a while, all told. Now, previously, I've talked about Mercury and Venus's retrogrades through Capricorn, bringing us a bit of a déjà vu of 2020, especially the first half of 2020, when we had Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto all passing through Capricorn. Certainly, I think that because of Omicron, a lot of places in the world are getting kind of a, 2020 light version, if you will, a much shorter, but nonetheless sort of an uncomfortable reminder of what happened in 2020. The good news is that as Venus first turned direct and then Mercury, things are going to start returning to normal in a lot of places that had previously been having this kind of 2020 déjà vu experience. The very next day, February 4th, Mars in Capricorn will sextile Jupiter at 8 degrees Pisces. Now, it's not a particularly dramatic aspect in terms of mundane or world events. It's just a sextile, which tends to be pretty mild, but it's worth mentioning on a personal level. It's a useful aspect for starting projects, especially ones with a competitive or adversarial edge, as shown by Mars in Capricorn. This can be personally empowering and energizing, and it gives us the drive to get results, to see things through, to benefit others, that's Jupiter in Pisces, as well as oneself. February 4th, same day, the Sun will conjoin Saturn at 15 Aquarius. So this is really the end of one Saturn synodic cycle and the start of another. It represents the union of the earthly and the divine. In more mundane terms, it could be a reset button for governmental matters at the highest levels. Last year's Sun-Saturn conjunction saw COVID cases falling, and because of Saturn's limiting nature, we sometimes would hear of things like high-level arrests or interceptions of weapons or missiles. Of course, Saturn has that kind of stop, go no further quality to it. Now, in terms of weather, this combination tends to bring heavy rain and snow in the northern hemisphere in winter, and it also, in the United States, brings the northeasters, which they're defined as synoptic scale extratropical cyclones in the western North Atlantic Ocean, in case you were wondering what the exact definition of a northeaster was. Week 2 There are really no astrological events that I think are important, so we can just jump into week 3, which is actually very eventful in February. February 14th, Mercury will enter Aquarius. I think that will help with the general hopelessness and kind of heaviness that people have been feeling recently. I think it will lower COVID cases, and more generally, the discussion in the business and academic and school communities will be about how to improve the situation over the long term, right? What do we do to ensure that people are protected? How do we sort of firm up our foundation going forward? What kind of safeguards can we put in place? We could see, I think, some kind of political measures intended to stimulate business and revive struggling school systems at this time. February 16th, we'll have Venus conjoining Mars at 16 Capricorn. And that's a very passionate combination. In the personal world, of course, we talk about romance, attraction, things like that. In the public sphere, it can mean that tempers will run high, that people are going to be very passionate about what they're doing. Now, it's a interesting combination because, of course, Venus is about unification, whereas Mars is about conflict and separation. And so when we bring them together, it can mean that people feel like they're locked in a kind of relationship with either a specific person or an entity, or it's happening, at a national or international level, but they can't stop talking. Like they might be yelling at each other, but they're still engaged. There's still a relationship, if you will. On the weather side, this combination tends to bring a significant rise in temperatures as well as moisture in the next day or two. The same day, February 16th, we will also have a full moon at 28 Leo. Now, this full moon is ruled by the Sun, who is in his detriment now in Aquarius, and in a separating conjunction with Saturn. So it's a very strongly Saturnian full moon despite the Sun's rulership. I think that the next 2 weeks are going to see issues around age, seniors, but also, again, that sense of limitation and restrictions. The discussion is going to be about how we need to limit ourselves or what we can sacrifice, something to help the larger community or greater good. In terms of weather, remember that lunations are also related to the weather. We are going to see more of the same of what we saw in early February. We're going to see cold temperatures, and we are going to see a relatively heavy downfall, particularly of snow and ice and other cold water falling from the sky. February 17th is probably the biggest aspect in terms of the weight of the planets involved. Jupiter in Pisces will sextile Uranus at 11 degrees Taurus. Now, just to put this in context, this is the waning sextile, so the last sextile, of a cycle that began in June 2010, when Jupiter and Uranus first conjoined in 0 degrees Aries. Now, they conjoined again in the last couple of degrees Pisces, but this was their first conjunction of the 3. The big news at the time, of course, was the recession, which was really kind of worldwide, and the financial crisis. The job loss and economic impact was still intense at that time, and in many ways, I think the political whirlwind that we are now experiencing, the polarization, was really sown in 2010 and 2011 with the rise of the Tea Party and the dialogue around that in the United States. This combination with Jupiter and Uranus can bring some dramatic moves and volatility in the equities markets. And that's pretty much what happened near the conjunction in 2010. About a month prior to this was the flash crash in 2010, which was ultimately pinned on a single trader. I'm not sure that was really the case, but it does tend to create these sort of intense and sudden moves up or down, even if they don't necessarily change the long-term trajectory. There can be some kind of drama around the financial markets. February 18th, the Sun will enter Pisces, and that's really more of a reminder. I think that Pisces season always has the opportunity to bring us a little bit of that Jupiter in Pisces cycle. Now remember, because Jupiter is in Pisces, as the Sun enters Pisces as well, we are going to see a little bit more of an emphasis on Jupiter because, of course, the Sun tends to illuminate whatever sign it's passing through. And next month, we're going to see that Sun-Jupiter conjunction, which I'll talk about more as we get closer. Now, the 4th week of February starts off February 20th with Jupiter's evening set into the Sun's rays at 11 Pisces. This means that Jupiter is going to get very close to the Sun for the next month or so. And his energies, those Jupiterian energies, will go into kind of a low power mode for about that month's time. What happens is that the Sun will get very close to Jupiter, and because the Sun is so bright, any planet that's very close to the Sun can't visually be seen because the glare of the sun overpowers it. And so this is what it means when a planet sets into the rays. It means that the sun gets very close for a certain number of days or weeks, in this case about a month, and then as the sun draws further away from Jupiter, Jupiter again emerges. This part of the cycle where Jupiter is under the beams indicates a situation where justice is delayed or denied, because of course Jupiter's main signification in the social sphere tends to be justice, also money. Programs and plans involving, humanitarian and compassionate help to others can also be on hold or revamped at this time. I always say that a planet goes into the repair shop when it goes under the beams. And so that's the case for Jupiter now. What's interesting is that the very next day, February 21st, Saturn will rise out of the sun's rays at 17 Aquarius. It's going to be a morning rise, and Saturn particularly likes being oriental of the sun. He likes being ahead of the sun when it rises. Now, Saturnian matters, because of that, are going to go into full awareness. Again, this is a planet emerging from the rays into its own power. Saturn, of course, represents accountability. It represents things like mortality, limitations, and just general encounters with reality, whether we like it or not. So, because it's a very powerful moment for Saturn as he sort of comes out on stage, we have to think about all the things that have been sort of quiet for the previous month and things that maybe underwent some kind of change around the time that Saturn went into the beams. Now, if we look at this, that was January 19th when Saturn went into the beams of the sun. And when we look at what was going on in the news, we saw a new important phase in the January 6th Capitol attack investigation, as well as investigations into former President Donald Trump's business practices. So I wouldn't be surprised if we got maybe less news, during that month when Saturn is under the beams, and then February 21st or thereabouts, we suddenly hear something fairly strong and dramatic coming out of these somewhat interlinked investigations. Obviously, because they were in the news a month ago, we can expect that they were going to undergo some kind of activity that is a little bit out of the public eye, maybe even secret. So to repeat some of the key themes for February, it's important to recognize that it's a preparatory month with less planetary activity than we've seen in a while. This is generally positive because it tends to mean that we have a little bit more leeway to do what we want. One of the issues tends to be that when planets are very active, when they're transiting, when they're doing things, they're kind of running the show, right? For better or for worse, we're not necessarily in charge of what we want to do. However, in a quieter time like February, we have a little bit more leeway to do what we want without too much planetary interference, good or bad, in our plans. Now, to put all of this in context, if you haven't yet seen my whole year 2022 forecast video, you can go on YouTube and view it. This will help you get the larger picture of 2022. And of course, I encourage you to subscribe to my channel on YouTube, Nina Griffin. This way, you'll get to see all the videos as they are made public. All right, thanks for watching. I'm Nina Griffin, and this is the Astrology and Magic channel.